People ask me how the trip went. It's so difficult to explain the trip that changed everything. This trip to Cobalt was one I had taken before. I was younger then and I didn't know what I was getting into. I took time off work. I bought a small recorder with a micro cassette. I got in the car and drove to Cobalt with Arnie and Barb. Back then, it wasn't such an enormous project yet. 15 years later, I fastened my seatbelt on October 10th, joined by a student of mine, and drove to Cobalt through a rainstorm. We drove along through the granite rocks, passing beautiful trees, changing colors, and signs with moose on them. Played the audiobook of Arnie's story as we drove. His voice echoed in the car like a dream.
I grew up in a little mining town in Cobalt, Ontario. I spent 2 years in grade 1, 2 years in grade 2, 2 years in grade 3, 2 years in grade 4, and 1 hour in grade 5.
I spotted the Welcome to Cobalt sign and quickly pulled over. This was not the first time I had my picture taken with a sign of this nature. It was different then, and Arnie was standing with me. Now, I stood alone, trying to smile through welling emotions. I felt like he was there again, sitting next to me, staring out through the glass at his past. When we arrived in Cobalt, I was asked to hold back because the camera crew was setting up in the cafe. How can I describe how that felt? I didn't know who was going to greet me at the cafe. I just knew that somehow I would know what to do when it was time. I walked into the cafe and I was greeted with all those blue eyes. Arnie's son and his brothers, sister, Arnie's wife, Arnie's nephew and wife. Tables covered in cobalt art and his Queen's Jubilee medal framed, just like it was when I had it. Barb saw me and stood up. "It's been such a long time, Janet Lee." She said it through tears. Our conversation was familiar. I started stories and they finished them. They described times I knew about Arnie. I asked questions and they knew the answers. Dale told me about that time he rode the toboggan down the hill. I asked about how the food was in the hospital, and he said, well, it was better than what we had at home. Next, all of us went to the land where their old school used to stand. Apparently, the building was abandoned a few years back, and the squatters, as they put it, started fires in the school to keep it warm. And that's what burned it to the ground. The land held a demolished pile of rubble. You could see bricks, posters, chalkboards, chairs, desks, all these things littered the ground. We approached the rubble. It occurred to me that we too were rubble from this school. The heartache it represented was continued. All of us were hurt. All of us were engaged in some way. We slowly walked around as Benny, one of the brothers, talked about where the rooms used to be and why all of them were so hurt by the building. When I was walking with the group, arm in arm with Arnie's son, Alan, I looked up in the sky thinking, come on, Arnie, I know you can leave me a message somehow. But will it be a rainbow, a cloud formation, or maybe it's on the ground? And the moment I looked down, I found the most brilliant and beautiful granite heart-shaped rock. I've done this many times in my past where I reached down to pick up a heart-shaped rock, and it was really not a heart rock. It was just like the sand that's made a shape out of a circular rock. But this time, I was right. I dug my fingers into the dirt around the shape. I was able to lift the 5-pound rock out of the dirt. As I stood up, cradling it in my hands, one of the brothers said, "It's from Arnold." The ceremony at the school bell was well attended. We were joined by more family and a teacher who had tutored the boys when they were men. I stood on the end of the line of family and looked across all the faces. The sun came out. Maggie read a poem, and they all held up the Arnie cards I handed out. They were so proud. It was really beautiful to think of the other people who would someday make the journey through Cobalt just to read the plaque we left. In loving memory of Arnold, Arnie Stewart, an adult with low literacy who inspired thousands of children with his story. Tell the kids to never be afraid and to always ask for help. Maybe someday they would stand there and remember what it meant to Arnie to speak to children, begging them not to go down the path that he went. Driving out of Cobalt, we stopped to pose triumphantly on this bridge, the past behind us and before us at the same time. This is why, when you ask me how the trip went, I have trouble explaining. It was a time when I experienced the past, the present, and the future all at once. How can you describe that?